video is going to change your mindset about power and wealth forever. Secrets that governments never want you to know about, and stories that hide evil plans and dark secrets behind their beautiful masks. Let me be clear. Imagine a man so powerful that when the American economy is on the verge of collapse, the government picks him instead of the Federal Reserve for help. A man who could make or break entire industries with a single decision. But behind the legend of a financial genius lies a darker story. How did one man achieve such unimaginable power? How much did his empire really cost? So I suggest you watch the video until the end to get the answer to this question and the hidden secret of J.P. Morgan, the man who shaped the future of American finance. John Pierpont Morgan was born in Connecticut in 1837 into privileged circumstances. John's father, genius Spencer Morgan, was already a wealthy banker, and he ensured that John had the best education that money could buy, since he wanted John to follow in his footsteps as a financier. However, despite being born into wealth, John's childhood was bleak. He was a sickly child. His medical conditions meant he often couldn't play outside with the other kids. Instead, you find him inside studying or reading financial statements. In fact, at one point, John became incapacitated by rheumatic fever, and his father's solution was to send John to live by himself in the Azores Island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. His dad believed the climate and salty air would help John recover from his conditions. When he was finally well enough, he continued his education. By 1857, John had studied in Boston, Switzerland, and Germany and was now 19 years old and ready to enter the workforce. At this point, John's father was a junior partner at the London-based merchant banking firm called George Peabody & Co. Thanks to his father, John was able to get a job on Wall Street at the banking firm which looked after Peabody's interest in America. From an early age, John's father feared that his son was too rash and had temperate to ever become a successful financier, and that he needed to learn restraint and responsibility. In 1861, John married his first love, a frail young woman named Amelia Sturgis. John's wife died just 4 months after their wedding, leaving John at 24. Immediately after losing her, John threw himself deep into his work more than ever. However, whilst John was going through his own crisis, so was the United States. Around this time, the American Civil War had broken out, and the 1860s Reconstruction Act should have meant John went off to fight, but he didn't. Instead, John paid $300 to be removed from enlisting and have a substitute stand in his place. That's not to say John didn't get involved in the war through. In fact, on the contrary, he profited from it hugely. In 1871, John saw the golden opportunity to team up with one of the leading financiers in the country, a banker named Anthony Drexel. Together, they founded the Drexel Morgan & Co. Private Merchant Banking House, which was later renamed to simply J.P. Morgan & Co. And this would be the firm that John would manage for the rest of his life, serving as the predecessor to the modern banking titan we know today as J.P. Morgan Chase. John had already identified his first major investment, the American railroad system. Now at time, most of the other big industries were dominated by one single magnate, like Carnegie dominating in steel and Rockefeller dominating in oil, but railroads weren't monopolized. Actually, it was the opposite. There were so many competing companies that offered very similar routes that they often slashed their prices to try and win customers. But where it must look at the railroad businesses and saw fierce competition, John saw opportunity. He felt the answer was consolidation, merging railroads together rather than competing. That's because John knew that the bigger a business got, the more it could benefit from economies of scale. So John's goal was always to turn multiple small companies into one unified conglomerate. Suddenly, rather than competing against each other and driving down prices, they could set whatever prices they wanted as they owned all the nearby railroads. So John invested heavily in multiple railroads which he began consolidating. He'd take over under-financed railroad companies, streamline their management and operational efficiency, and merge the small companies together into one dominant player that could crush any remaining competitors, which of course he'd then be able to take over as well. John used this tactic to such great effect that it was even named after him, becoming known as Morganization. But the other thing John did differently to other businessmen and investors of the time was that he played a very proactive role in the corporate management of these companies. John wasn't content with simply buying shares, then sitting back and raking in the profits. He was the man who craved control. John needed to be one calling the shots, so he regularly used his influential position on boards of directors to direct the companies as he saw fit. When railroads came to him for help, he refused unless he was given full control. This not only gave John the power he wanted, but also created a more stable industry, which in turn attracted even more investments. Money from Europe flowed into U.S. railway companies now that it looked more consolidated and stable thanks to John, and this of course made John even wealthier. John kept acquiring more rail lines and constantly wanted to outdo his previous achievement and be more ambitious. For example, he purchased 250,000 shares of stock from William Vanderbilt in one of the most prominent railways in the country, the New York Central Railroad. He then took things even farther the following year when he executed the largest transaction in railroad bonds ever made in the United States, underwriting the sale of $40 million in bonds to finance the competition of the Northern Pacific Railroad. Before long, John owned one-third of all railroads in America, at a time where 60% of America's stock market capitalization consisted of railroad companies. John was actually very self-conscious about his appearance and got angry at being photographed. According to his grandson, whenever John had a portrait done, he always ordered them to redo his nose to make it look more normal, which is why it's not as noticeable in pictures of him. But his startling facial features combined with his towering head and his aggressive way of speaking all meant that John was an intimidating presence to be around. However, in 1901, it seemed John had finally met someone who would stand him up to him, President Theodore Roosevelt. You see, John had just consolidated his Northern Pacific Railroad together with two other railways in the region and created a massive new holding company called the Northern Securities Corporation, and he'd been able to get away with this kind of monopolistic practices due to his close relationship with the Surrey President William McKinley. But then McKinley was assassinated, and suddenly Theodore Roosevelt became president, who took a very different view on what John was doing. Roosevelt ordered the Justice Department to file a suit against the company for violating the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1819. While John fought this in court, the company was ultimately split up, and this was just the beginning of a very tense relationship between the two men. When John heard Roosevelt was going to Africa one year, John said, "Good, I hope the first lion that meets him does his duty." Now, so far we've heard how J.P. Morgan revolutionized the railroads, which changed the way people transported goods. John was facing increased scrutiny, the age of the robber baron who could conduct his business unchecked and unimpeded was slowly coming to an end, as the American public was growing increasingly weary of a handful of businessmen wielding so much power and influence. John was summoned to testify before the Peugeot Committee that wanted to investigate the true reach of Wall Street's money trust and its role in the American economy. John was front and center during the Peugeot Committee hearings, and he became the face of Wall Street power. Despite his financial success, John's mental state was deteriorating. He had multiple nervous breakdowns, and he struggled to deal with the public's negative portrayal of him in the media. Ironically, he was actually due to board the Titanic for its maiden voyage, but due to health issues pulled out at the last moment. Meanwhile, the Peugeot Committee paved the way for the establishment of the Federal Reserve, since it was clear they couldn't just rely on a handful of ultra-rich and powerful individuals to step in and fix the economy. But John would never see the repercussions of this investigation, because months later, on March 31st, 1913, the 75-year-old financier died while on vacation in Rome. After his death, John's son took over the business and continued its expansions. Alright guys, that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment. See you in the next video.